Good morning, everyone. You're all very welcome. A few new faces here, so hopefully you'll keep coming back to other events as they come up. I'm delighted to have Fabiola Schneider. She's assistant professor in accountancy in the College of Business. She does lots of work on climate emergency, sustainable transitions, fossil fuel financing, ESG reporting, impact investing. Very topical and I wouldn't say controversial, but provocative amongst some. So we're looking forward to a really interesting conversation. She's an Ad Astra fellow in the College of Business. So I'll hand over to her now. We'll have a good few time for Q&A afterwards, and I'll make a few announcements about events that are forthcoming after that. So hand you over to Fabiola.
And also to mention that I'm very honored to be Earth Institute.
And she is also an Earth Institute Climate Fellow.
Yes,
soon to be formally launched next 2 weeks' time. So we'll hear lots more from Fabiola on that as well.
Thank you. Yeah, so delighted to be here. I'm not sure how many business speakers you get here, and that's probably already the controversial bit. I hope I can convince you that the College of Business is also key if you want to achieve sustainability goals. So what I'm going to talk about is corporate disclosures and accountability. And I know we have a lot of people that do real science here. I did start in chemistry and then decided to switch over to more the finance side of things. Why did I do that? I did internships in big corporations because I think corporations are really at the heart of transition. We have corporations that have revenues which are larger than GDPs of countries. So clearly, if we want to move the world, we will need to move those big corporations. And I think that sustainable finance can be the key lever to achieve this change. So I changed from doing chemistry because I wanted to do sustainable supply chains to begin with in the chemical industry, and realized, well, the way we account for sustainability and for values is always in monetary terms. Seemed crazy to me at the time, still seems crazy to me, but apparently I needed to understand finance in order to be able to achieve these sustainability goals. So that's what I did. I came to UCD. I did sustainable finance here as my master's, met some really driven people, and decided to stay to do a PhD in transition finance and accounting. So my research, the first big pillar here, is sustainable investment in finance. I then realized when doing finance and looking at global capital markets, we really need sustainable data to be able to drive decisions. And so far, we don't really have that. It's hard to make a decision on sustainability if you don't even know where we start. Who does the data in finance? Well, that's the accountants. That's sustainability reporting. So I moved from the big overall picture of how capital flows move around and what drives money to where's even the data, because to start making decisions, we first need to assess where we are. So my second big pillar here, and that's what I'm doing at the in Quinn School of Business over there, is sustainability reporting and accounting. So far, double entry accounting, if anyone has done those fun T crossings, there's nothing that's not monetary value or products. We don't really account for emissions in these things. They're not usually in a balance sheet. Luckily, at the moment, that's changing. I do a lot of policy work, and I will talk about that on the next slide. We have mandatory requirements now for companies to report beyond financial reporting. So in the past, revenues, costs, and so on, yes, we need to disclose that, and there's strict rules on how that's done. But all the sustainability information, that's voluntary reporting. Voluntary means you can report whatever, whenever, however. Are you going to report the most important impacts? Are you just going to disclose your sins? Probably not. You're probably going to cherry pick the information that you like. You're probably going to pick the indicators that suit you best, which creates no comparability. If everyone just discloses what they like, it A, gives you probably a too positive picture, and B, you can't compare across companies because everyone discloses something else. So even though maybe they're all disclosing emissions, we're all looking at fruit. It's apples, pears, and bananas, and you can't really compare the emissions of one company to another one, which makes it very difficult for financial markets to incorporate that information, because financial markets rely on transparency and credibility, and in sustainability data for a long time, that really wasn't there. So it was very difficult to do that. So I realized voluntary reporting really doesn't do the job. So I'm now working quite a lot on policy. I work with the European Commission and so on, in order to get the right laws, the right regulations, so that we have this information that then can backfeed into financial markets. Overall, I could list some more SDGs here, but the main SDGs that I work on would be clean energy. I work on fossil fuel finance. At the heart of transition is our energy system. We need to cut off the oil and gas sector. We need to stop money flowing into it. Then why is industry innovation and infrastructure there? If we're talking about emissions, emission intensity is actually captured under that SDG, whereas absolute emissions would be captured under SDG 13, climate action. So depending on the perspective, again, accounting here, which indicator you look at, absolute emissions or emission intensities, you actually end up in different SDGs. So to give a bit more flavor to all of these pillars that I'm still pursuing, and that's the SDG that I would love to add here. So we just got a big Horizon grant for biodiversity. Nature finance is the big new thing. So climate is kind of established already. There's a good few cool tools, and emission reporting is the most developed. But I don't think I need to tell people here that biodiversity is the next big crisis that is going to come up, and we're lucky to have nature funding for that. Sustainable investment and finance, to add some buzzwords to this for anyone that's interested in the business language. So impact investing is when you try to invest with a purpose. So you want to achieve an outcome and you invest for it. Oftentimes that means a trade-off, because your most important goal usually is a return. And there's a big debate in academia and in practice on the trade-off between, am I willing to sacrifice returns in order to achieve this societal impact? Studies show there is people, especially in the retail space or the consumer space, that are willing to give up returns. But the way that our legal system works, there's fiduciary duty. So a lot of asset managers are not able to do that because the law says you have to prioritize returns because your job is to make a return. So there's a lot of debate in that field. Voice versus exit is, what do I do if a company doesn't behave as I wish? So I'm the investor, I own a share or I own debt in this company. The company does something I don't like, an externality, high emissions. What do I do? I'm the investor, but I'm not the manager, right? I'm not the CEO. And you have two options. That's usually voice versus exit. I can either complain, I can write letters, I can do campaigns, or I exit. Exit means I sell my shares, I sell my debt. And that's, both have benefits and downsides, and that's an area that I work on. Last thing then, fossil fuel financing. I mentioned this already. In sustainable finance, you can either focus on the green side, so I want to bring renewables up in this case, or I want to stop fossil fuel financing. And I'm on the nasty side of things, so I try to stop money going into fossil fuels. Why are those two separate topics? Well, they are financed very differently. First of all, fossil fuel industry, very old, a lot of legacy business, very asset intensive. Exploration takes huge amounts of capital up front, and then you have these big plants everywhere that need to be maintained and operated. Renewables, very decentralized, right? Very smaller projects, much newer companies, much less established. That's why their financing works entirely different. You don't have the assets as collateral. They're younger, smaller firms. They don't have the same access to capital markets. And I focus on the fossil fuel side, so the big old legacy companies with the huge lobbying power that comes with it. We've already heard that word, ESG disclosure. For anyone not in business, that's probably a weird acronym. So sustainability is not a new topic, also not an investment. It used to be called responsible investment. The new buzzword, what everyone's talking about, ESG, environmental, social, governance. So sustainability was broken down into 3 pillars: environmental, social, and governance. And that's how the conversation is shaped at the moment. So whenever you hear sustainability in the business field, it will probably be ESG. And disclosure just means reporting on it in sustainability reports and so on. My topic then, what do I work on? Because ESG, as you can imagine, environmental, social, governance, huge topic. Anything you can think of falls under one of these pillars. That goes from obvious things like labor to things like tax, corporate governance in terms of board, gender diversity. So it's really a huge topic. So the one topic that I picked, or the 2 topics that I picked for you, is Scope 3 emissions. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the greenhouse gas protocol. That's how the business world looks at emissions. So it's not national inventories and so on, where you just have cumulative amounts and carbon budgets. In the business world, there is no carbon budgets as such, because there's no cap. We're not looking at an economy perspective. We're taking the perspective of one corporation. So for larger corporations, the greenhouse gas protocol defines 3 scopes. Scope 1 emissions of a company are direct emissions. They're quite easy to spot. It's the nasty emissions coming out of a chimney or an exhaust pipe. So if I own an asset and it burns fossil fuels, that's my Scope 1 emissions. If I'm a utility company burning coal, that's my Scope 1 emissions. For most companies, that's a tiny share of their emissions, because most companies don't burn fossil fuels. Even for their vehicles, a lot of companies lease them, and then it's not your vehicle, so it wouldn't be your Scope 1 emissions because someone else owns that car. So Scope 1 emissions, direct emissions, tiny. Scope 2 emissions, likewise not very big for most companies. That's purchased energy. Energy could be electricity, it could be heating, it could be cooling. So if you run a data center and you own that data center, you have high Scope 2 emissions because you buy a lot of electricity probably. By far largest share is Scope 3 emissions. There are also indirect emissions, and here it's getting really abstract because we're looking at the entire value chain. So if I'm a corporation, it's a bit too easy to say, oh, I just buy the steel of someone else, and then my company is not carbon intensive. Well, clearly you're depending on that steel that you're buying. It's not your emissions, correct? You're not producing the steel, but you're buying a carbon intensive product. And that's covered under Scope 3. So you look at the entire value chain. You start at all the purchased goods and services. And the other important angle is what happens after I sell my product. Because for our fossil fuel companies, they're also very happy to say, our operations are net zero. We put some solar panels on the refinery. Does that mean suddenly they're a sustainable company? No, they're still selling a fossil fuel. It's a bit too easy to say, oh no, it's you guys, you fly, you drive your car, not my emissions. So to be controversial, I'm going to call it like a drug dealer that says, well, I'm not the one using it, so it's not my problem. Well, still, you're selling fossil fuels. It's your emissions. And that's also captured under scope 3, category 11, use of product. So what happens after I sell my product? In a fossil fuel case, someone burns it. That's your emissions. They should be accounted in the your balance. Scope 3 then directly links to supply chain transparency, which is a huge issue because usually large corporations, they hold a lot of power over their supply chain, but they like to hide behind this idea of, oh, I have 1 million small suppliers. It's not my emissions. I can't measure it. I can't manage it. If you ask me, that's a bit too easy because, right, who holds the purchasing power? Who makes those contracts? If you're the big H&M, you do hold the power over your suppliers. It's a bit too easy to say, no, small suppliers in Turkey should get their electricity sorted rather than me, the big corporation who buys it. So scope 3 is a really systemic approach to emission reporting, and it helps defining hotspot between different corporations because there's a lot of overlap. Usually scientists at this point tell me scope 3, but that's a huge double counting, right? Because same supply chains of different suppliers. Yes, absolutely correct. But remember, we're not doing carbon budget. We're not doing an inventory. We're not summing up all the companies to come up with one big number. It's really from the perspective of one corporation to see where is my issue. And then no problem with double counting because you're not aggregating it. It's really your perspective of where can I have an influence or what's my responsibility. And therefore, if you do double counting, it's a positive thing. If you realize, hey, me and my 5 biggest competitors all have the same problem, we can all solve that one problem and all benefit from the carbon savings, right? So especially in the electrification sense, there's a huge amount of benefits that could be reaped if companies came together and worked on a solution. The last bit then, and I'm trying not to be too boring with acronyms here, but in policy and regulation, we have a huge amount of incoming regulation. Companies will complain all day about all the new disclosures that they have to make. CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, ESRS, European Sustainability Reporting Standards, the EU Taxonomy, SFDR, Sustainable Finance Disclosure Regulation. So a huge amount of laws are incoming, which means mandatory reporting for all sorts of actors. Why is there so many? Because we have so many angles to cover. On the one hand, we need entity-level disclosures. H&M needs to disclose whatever. Carrie needs to disclose. That's entity level, so the whole company. Companies are way too complex today. That does not give you a great picture of the company. Usually you need to look at it by activity in order to understand real risks. If you take some big company that does, on the one hand, insurance, on the other hand, underwrites bonds, on the other hand, does energy, and then has a little business to run distribution, that one overhead number is not telling you much. So you need a by activity approach. That's the taxonomy. Sustainable finance then takes financial product level, because most financial products are a portfolio. So you have more than one company. So even that, again, those small numbers need to be aggregated at portfolio level, a whole new story that currently takes the markets by storm. So labeling is the big issue in financial markets as well, where what can I call green, what can I call transition? A lot of debates going on. And I'm organizing a special issue on that topic. Where do I work here? The EU platform on sustainable finance. That's the technical expert gremium advising on the EU green taxonomy, because in Brussels, of course, they recognize that they probably need some external expertise on all these regulations from industry experts. So industry associations are there, but also academics and NGOs. The NGOs quit because they weren't happy with the process, but originally they were in it. I'm also working with the regulator. So ESMA, the European Securities and Market Authority, they're the ones that look into greenwashing. Because what happens if someone mislabels their products? What happens if someone misrepresents themselves in their sustainability reports? Someone needs to follow up on this, and the regulator is making good progress on the enforcement side as well. So that would be ESMA. Because remember, I'm in the business side. I'm not looking at consumer products. So I don't care if someone labels their beef in Tesco as carbon neutral. That's a big problem, but we have consumer protection agencies for that. What happens if Tesco in their annual report says, I'm the most sustainable retail supplier in the world? Someone needs to follow up on that and say, well, are you really? That would be ESMA. And I'm working on their sustainability standing committee as well. I mentioned the greenhouse gas protocol already. It's a great piece. It was a pioneer in the space, and it set the tone for everything that followed, but it's over 20 years old. Science has moved on. Accounting has moved on. We now have much better processes. So what they're recommending is a bit outdated at times because we could do it much better. So they're doing a review, and I'm on the Scope 3 technical working group there as well. Other than that, love talking to journalists all day. So I'm writing stuff on the Financial Times because, of course, you also want to influence practitioners. There's no point having perfect laws if no one actually implements them. And outlets like the Financial Times are a good way to actually reach people that shift the trillions. Likewise, teaching, big passion of mine. I teach sustainability reporting, which means that the future auditors are sitting in my classes. So I'm hoping that by inspiring them to be rigorous on sustainability, that will have a positive impact as well. And that's it. My last point, we're organizing a conference in January here in the Quinn School of Business on nature finance, sustainable finance, impact investing. You're all very welcome to join for any of that if it's of interest. And I'm looking forward to your questions.